UFC superstar Conor McGregor accepted an 18-month period of ineligibility for violating the promotion's anti-doping policy, according to official UFC and ESPN announcements. McGregor's missed tests occurred on June 13th, September 19th, and September 20th, 2024, and were each classified as whereabouts failures by CSAD under the UFC anti-doping policy. Critically, his period of ineligibility began on September 20th, 2024, and will conclude on March 20th, 2026, just under 3 months before the scheduled UFC White House event on June 14th, 2026. The June 13th missed test occurred on the exact same day UFC CEO Dana White announced McGregor's scheduled fight with Michael Chandler had been postponed. It's crucial to clarify what McGregor violated. These are not failed drug tests for banned substances. Whereabouts: failures are administrative violations where fighters fail to be available for out-of-competition testing at their declared location. Under the UFC anti-doping policy administered by CSAD, Contract Services and Administration for Doping Control, all athletes must provide detailed quarterly schedules indicating where they'll be every single day, including a specific 1-hour window each day when they guarantee availability for testing. The system works through the ADAMS database, Anti-Doping Administration and Management System, where fighters submit their whereabouts information 24/7. Testers can show up unannounced at any time based on this information to collect urine and blood samples. If a fighter isn't at their declared location during their specified window or fails to update their whereabouts when plans change, it counts as a whereabouts failure. According to UFC anti-doping protocols, 3 whereabouts failures within a 12-month period trigger a sanction. The standard penalty is 24 months of ineligibility, but McGregor received a reduced sentence. Taking McGregor's cooperation and circumstances into account, CSAD reduced the standard 24-month sanction for 3 whereabouts failures by 6 months, according to official UFC statements. This reduction suggests McGregor worked with investigators, provided explanations for the missed tests, and demonstrated that the failures resulted from logistical issues rather than deliberately avoiding testing. Athletes who cooperate fully and show the violations weren't attempts to evade detection often receive reduced sanctions compared to the maximum penalties. The timing of McGregor's 3 missed tests creates an interesting pattern. The June 13th, 2024 failure occurred the same day Dana White publicly announced McGregor's fight with Chandler was postponed due to a broken toe. This suggests McGregor's whereabouts information might not have been updated following the injury and subsequent changes to his schedule and location. According to official reports, McGregor is eligible to compete after March 20th, keeping alive his hopes to compete on the UFC White House card, which President Donald Trump recently announced would take place on June 14th. This gives McGregor approximately 86 days between his eligibility date and the historic White House event. Theoretically enough time for a training camp, although far from ideal preparation for someone who hasn't competed since July 2021. McGregor appeared on Fox News and claimed his White House fight against Michael Chandler was a done deal, signed, delivered, and stated it ain't a negotiation, suggesting the contract was finalized. However, Dana White directly contradicted these claims in subsequent media appearances, saying no fights are officially booked for the White House card yet, and that the UFC is still determining matchups for the event. This contradiction creates confusion about McGregor's actual status. Did he sign a bout agreement before discovering his suspension would extend into early 2026? Is his suspension the reason the UFC hasn't formally announced the fight? Or is McGregor making promotional statements about a fight that never reached the signed contract stage? The compressed timeline between March 20th and June 14th presents legitimate concerns about McGregor's preparation. Elite fighters typically require 8 to 12 weeks minimum for proper training camps that address cardio, sparring, weight management, and fight-specific preparation. McGregor would have approximately 12 weeks, which seems adequate on paper, but becomes problematic when considering his extended layoff. McGregor, 36, hasn't competed since suffering a broken leg in his trilogy bout with Dustin Poirier in 2021, according to UFC records. That means by June 2026, he'll have been absent from competition for nearly 5 full years. The combination of a 5-year layoff, turning 37 years old, and a shortened training camp creates substantial questions about whether McGregor can perform at championship level against a fighter like Chandler who's remained active. Additionally, McGregor has submitted 4 samples in 2025, according to UFC's anti-doping website, demonstrating he's remained in the testing pool during his suspension and met the requirements for maintaining eligibility. Athletes serving whereabouts violations can still be tested during their ineligibility period, and continued testing helps verify they're not using banned substances while suspended from competition. Michael Chandler has been waiting for the McGregor fight since they coached opposite each other on Season 31 of The Ultimate Fighter in 2023. Chandler turned down multiple high-profile opponents and fight opportunities, betting his career trajectory on eventually facing McGregor in what would be the biggest payday of his professional life. That patience now faces its ultimate test. Chandler is 38 years old himself and has fought just once since November 2022, a loss to Charles Oliveira at UFC 309. He's essentially put his career on hold for over 2 years waiting for McGregor, watching other lightweights and welterweights climb rankings and secure title shots while he remained committed to the McGregor sweepstakes. From the UFC's perspective, the McGregor-Chandler matchup makes perfect sense for the White House event if both fighters are healthy and eligible. McGregor is the promotion's biggest pay-per-view draw, and Chandler brings exciting finishing ability and a willingness to engage in violent exchanges that should produce entertainment regardless of outcome. The matchup sells itself to casual fans while providing hardcore followers with legitimate competitive intrigue. However, the complications continue mounting. McGregor's toe injury that postponed the original June 2024 fight was never fully explained with medical documentation. His broken leg from the Poirier fight required surgical repair with an intramedullary rod and extensive rehabilitation. Questions persist about whether McGregor's leg can withstand the torque and impact of checking leg kicks, sprawling on takedowns, and generating power on strikes. All movements that place enormous stress on the tibia and fibula that fractured catastrophically in 2021. Chandler's recent performance against Oliveira showed vulnerabilities. He was controlled on the ground, outstruck in exchanges, and appeared slower than in his Bellator prime. While his power remains evident and his durability is unquestionable, the extended layoff waiting for McGregor may have cost him crucial competitive sharpness that's difficult to regain, particularly at 38 years old. If McGregor truly is signed for June 14th, the UFC faces a promotional gamble. They'd be banking on a 37-year-old fighter who hasn't won since January 2020 against Donald Cerrone, and hasn't competed in 5 years, coming off an 18-month anti-doping suspension with a shortened training camp to headline one of the most high-profile events in UFC history at the White House. That's a lot of variables that could go wrong. The UFC anti-doping policy, administered by CSAD, is one of the strictest testing programs in professional sports. Unlike many athletic organizations that only test during competition, the UFC conducts extensive out-of-competition testing year-round, including during fighter suspensions, injuries, and inactive periods. Athletes are required to update their whereabouts information continuously through the ADAMS mobile app. If a fighter's plans change, they decide to visit family, travel for appearances, switch training facilities, or simply stay home instead of going to the gym. They must update their whereabouts within hours to avoid violations. The system is deliberately rigid to prevent fighters from avoiding testing by claiming their schedules changed unexpectedly. Critics of whereabouts systems argue they're overly invasive, requiring athletes to essentially report their movements with GPS-level precision every day of the year. Supporters counter that out-of-competition testing is the only effective way to catch sophisticated doping, since many performance-enhancing drugs clear the system quickly. McGregor's 6-month reduction from the standard 24-month penalty suggests CSAD believed his missed tests resulted from negligence or poor management of his whereabouts obligations rather than deliberate evasion. Had they suspected McGregor was intentionally avoiding testers, the full 2-year ban would likely have been enforced with no reduction. The suspension technically started September 20th, 2024, the date of his third whereabouts failure, meaning McGregor has already served over a year of his 18-month penalty. By the time he becomes eligible on March 20th, 2026, the suspension will be complete and he'll face no restrictions on competition beyond normal UFC requirements. McGregor's current situation represents a dramatic fall from his peak years as a 2-division UFC champion and the promotion's biggest star. From knocking out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds, to capturing the lightweight title from Eddie Alvarez, to boxing Floyd Mayweather in the highest-grossing combat sports event in history, McGregor dominated both competition and headlines from 2015 to 2017. His record since winning the lightweight title in November 2016 tells a different story. 1-3 in the UFC, with his only victory coming against 37-year-old Donald Cerrone in a 40-second knockout at welterweight. He lost to Khabib Nurmagomedov by submission, then lost twice to Dustin Poirier, including the trilogy fight that ended with his broken leg. The question facing the MMA community is whether McGregor can recapture any resemblance of his championship form. He'll be 37 years old at the White House event, 5 years removed from competition, coming off catastrophic injury with a compressed training camp, facing an opponent in Chandler who brings wrestling threats that have troubled McGregor throughout his career. From a business perspective, the UFC desperately wants this fight to happen. McGregor's drawing power remains unmatched despite his extended absence. UFC 264, his most recent appearance, sold 1.8 million pay-per-views despite occurring during the COVID-19 pandemic and ending with injury. His peak pay-per-view, UFC 229 against Khabib, generated 2.4 million buys, still the UFC record. The White House setting could push those numbers into record territory. But sporting merit and business interests don't always align. If McGregor returns and gets dominated or injured again, it damages both his marketability and the promotion's credibility. The UFC must weigh the short-term pay-per-view windfall against potential long-term harm to McGregor's brand and the sport's reputation if he can't compete at even a respectable level after 5 years away. Conor McGregor's acceptance of an 18-month suspension for 3 whereabouts failures under the UFC anti-doping policy complicates but doesn't eliminate his planned June 2026 White House comeback against Michael Chandler. His eligibility date of March 20, 2026 provides just under 3 months before the June 14th event, creating a compressed timeline for a fighter who will have been absent from competition for nearly 5 years. Whether Dana White's contradiction of McGregor's done-deal signed claims reflects scheduling complications from the suspension or indicates the fight was never as finalized as McGregor suggested remains unclear. What's certain is that McGregor's path back to UFC competition has grown more challenging, and his ability to perform at elite level after such an extended layoff faces legitimate questions that won't be answered until he steps back into the octagon.